Jack is here. Hello, Jack. Jack, now, for those of you who have read his bio or know of his work, I think Jack sums himself up the best when he says, Jack just isn't about work. He enjoys long, slow walks in and around constructed wetlands. He likes to spend time with bio-retention systems of all sorts. Rain gardens, biopods, bioswales and bio-retention basins. It doesn't matter to Jack. Wetland plants are another interest. I think many of us can agree with that. Who is not interested in a good wetland plant? And if there is a carrot's oppressor to lovingly caress, all the better. So ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to the stage, Jack Mullally.
Thank you everyone for humouring my dodgy bio. I have a real aversion to serious bios, so I wrote that several years ago, so I didn't have to ever write a serious one. Today I am going to have a chat and tell a few stories about water-sensitive urban design in Australia. And I'll explain in a moment why it's stories, why stories is an important word here. There is nothing in this presentation to do with willows. I just wanted to be able to cross out the word willows and replace WSUDs in a kid's book title. But when the conference committee approached me about this presentation, they came up to me and said, "Hey Jack, look, we're wondering if you or someone else from Ideanthro could come over and do a presentation." And that's great. There's a slight problem with the or someone else from Ideanthro part of it, because Ideanthro is essentially me and 20 chickens. But that wasn't, we could solve that problem. Winnie and I had a great discussion about this. Chicken is, there's not many words in chicken. There's bark, there's cluck, there's maybe scratch, scratch, scratch. But it's a very emotive and expressive language, because you can go from bark to bark. See, you can get a lot across with one word. You can also make yourself look like a mad Aussie. But we had a conversation, decided that I was the best person to come over here and present to you, but it was a close run thing. I was only marginally the best person. And the reason for that is that my chickens are intrinsically much more closely connected to water and the hydrological cycle than I am. Give my chickens any opportunity, it's raining, they will shun the nice clean tap water that's for them and go and drink from a muddy puddle. They know if it's raining, their favourite water will be there. They also know if it's raining really heavily and that there is a giant moat around their chicken house. There's nothing to be done. They're just going to have to walk through it. It just is the way it is. And for me, that's important, because getting out about and sensing, getting in amongst this wussity stuff that we are building and actually feeling what it's like in the real world and experiencing it in the real world is really important, because there's some stuff that you can only learn that way. And this is how I've gone about my career and learned a lot of what I know. I'm not the most knowledgeable designer in the room by a long shot. I'm probably not the most knowledgeable policy person. I'm probably not even the most knowledgeable maintenance person. What I possibly am is the person who spent more time on the ground looking at these systems than anyone else here. I have a particular bioretention system in Logan, which is immediately south of Brisbane, that I have photographs of on more than 40 different days, and they're only the days I've bothered to take photographs of, and 30 of those happened within a year and a half. So you're getting the impression I like getting out on the ground and watching this stuff. So the question should be, why stories? Well, the reason I'm going to tell you a few stories today is that I am quite a realist about what we've been doing for water-sensitive urban design in Australia, which is there's lots of good stuff that we've done, and there's lots of stuff that hasn't worked as well as we would like, right? I'm not going to stand up here and try and sugarcoat that we have all of this stuff sorted and it's a magic utopia or the like. So I want to tell a few select stories of this, because what I hope is that by telling stories, you can get a little bit of an experience of some things that are going on in WSUD in Australia, and you can listen to those and you can go, oh, okay, if that particular bit sounds interesting to me, that might work over here. You can pick that up, you can test it in your work, and you can try it. But if the bit doesn't sound interesting to you, by all means, just ignore me. Just ignore that bit and move on to the next idea. I'm not standing up here to say, this is it, let's do everything in this particular way. But I was a little bit troubled about what stories to pick. I therefore decided to come over a few days early. Stu Farrant from Morpham, wherever Stu is. I hope you've come to my presentation, Stu. Woo! Stu was kind enough to put me up in Wellington for a couple of days, and then we travelled up on Tuesday together to Auckland. And Stu took me out and showed me a few different WSUD sites around, first Wellington, so some street trees in the city centre, fairly high profile project. We came up to Auckland on Tuesday, and Stu showed me this new wetland of his, looking lovely, establishing quite nicely. He also showed me back in Wellington here this lovely big wetland in the middle of the city. And I think it was yesterday morning, I went for a walk down to, is it the Wyndham Quarter? Is that the correct term? Down here, looked at all these amazing rain gardens, like really lush, really high profile. And so I got a little bit of a feel that there's definitely a fair few high profile sites of WSUD in New Zealand. But I also heard that there was, and this might vary around the country, but there's some local governments like Auckland, for sure, that are on this journey of trying to mainstream this stuff. Not just doing high profile case study sites, but also trying to mainstream this, get it into policy, get normal developers, maybe even normal residents trying to implement this stuff. And this really strikes a chord for me, because my interest in this is, high profile sites are great, we need them, but my vision of when I think of why I'm doing this stuff in water sensitive urban design, my vision is long term. It might be really long term, might be crazy long term, it might be 500 years long term, like this Zealandia project in Wellington is. But my vision is essentially, effectively, we get to the point where we can have pristine creeks in our cities. Might be crazy long term, but that's where I want to get to. And there's only one way to do that. We have to find a way to mainstream this stuff. And it might not mean mainstreaming via retention systems on every corner, but mainstreaming something that's water sensitive and gets us to that goal. So I want to tell stories today. What's coming next? Yes, I want to tell 4 stories today that are broadly themed around how do we mainstream water sensitive urban design. The first one's going to be a story about how local governments in Australia have gone about getting their first maintenance budget. Quick story about cognitive biases and WSUD, something I've been noticing as we go around the traps. The relevance of several years in, where we've had guidelines for quite a while and people start scratching their heads and like, why did we write that in the guideline? And hopefully if we get there, some comments about this being a journey and our policy is going to evolve over time. I may talk for too long here, I may not get to all of it, that's totally cool. I promise I won't be the presenter that gets halfway through and then rushes through half a presentation in 3 minutes. I'll just stop. Before we get into it, a warning. I am going to try and leave time for questions. I'm giving you the warning now, not necessarily so that you can have time to think of the questions so that you can learn something, but so that you're prepared that if I get to the end and no one asks a question, I will ask you questions, because it's a prime opportunity for me to learn. So if you don't want me to randomly pick you out of the audience and ask you a question, think about something to ask me in advance. Okay, let's get on to how have local governments in Australia gone about getting their first maintenance budget. So for this story to make sense, we have to realise that I joined the industry in 2010 when I dressed far more formally than I currently do now. And I started as a final year uni student with Logan City Council. It's the council immediately south of Brisbane. And my job was to go out and find all the stormwater treatment systems and then to assess their condition. And I did that for a few years, left Logan at the end of 2012. And when I left at the end of 2012, of the 8 urban local governments in southeast Queensland, only one had some form of maintenance budget for its green infrastructure. That was Gold Coast City Council. The others didn't. A few of them had a little bit of money for grey stuff like gross pollutant traps and so on and so forth. But fast forward 5 years down the track, 7 of the 8 local governments in southeast Queensland now have a maintenance budget of some description for this. It might not be perfect, but it's a fair shift from 12% to 88% of the council having a budget. It's a pretty good shift. And I was fortunate in those 5 years, because I worked at Healthy Waterways in the Water by Design program, to spend a bunch of time with councils all over southeast Queensland and all over Queensland, and a few select ones in other parts of Australia. And when you look at how local governments have gone about getting a maintenance budget, they've taken slightly different approaches, but we can fit it back into a rough pattern that everyone seems to follow. And for anyone who's in the asset management world, this isn't rocket science, but it's just nice to break this out. So I'm going to step through these, what have I got up there, 7 steps, These 7 steps are just a little bit of commentary about how this has gone, because it seems to work for the local governments to get it. This isn't to get the perfect budget, this isn't like long-term asset management, everything is sorted, but this is how the local governments have first broken into the cycle. Because when you first start building this green infrastructure, it's a new asset type that requires different skill sets, it requires a bit of different knowledge, requires money to maintain. And when you first get this stuff, you're actually stuck in an awkward cycle where you have an asset, it costs something to maintain it. But until you maintain it the first time, you don't really know what you need to do to maintain it. And so, and then because of that, because you don't really know what to do to maintain it, you're like, well, how do I figure out how much it costs? So how do I make a case to get a budget? If I can't get a case to make a budget, then how do I go and do any works to learn? It's stuck in this awkward cycle, and you have to break into this cycle. So these steps. This is also steps for a officer-driven approach to getting a budget. So this is, upper management comes in at the end of this, but for the most part, the local governments have drawn and got a budget doing it this way. It's largely an officer-driven. So first step, finding the assets. It's pretty simple. If you're the case of Logan, you get a silly student, namely me, to go and trawl through a huge number of development applications over the past 3 or 4 years and find all the assets. It's a little bit time consuming, but it's not particularly hard, because at least in the Australian context, we're either receiving assets that the few that we've built ourselves, well, they're easy to find, just go and talk to whoever built them. And then it's developer contributed asset, vested assets. So trawl through the DAs, that's a common approach that these local governments have taken. Second step, assessing their condition. Doesn't have to be the most robust condition assessment process, but just get some indication, like 2% of our assets in good condition, 3%, 5%, 20%. Just some indication of how many are in good condition, how many are poor, so we've got some handle on what the asset base is. Then you go down to the very small white text and you have a panic attack when you start to get an indication of how many assets you have and how much this is going to cost. That's all pretty straightforward. Where this gets really interesting, the bit of this that I love, is what some local governments did next here. Mackay Regional Council is a pretty good example of this. So one of the real dilemmas that I've noticed with setting up a maintenance budget in this space is that you have to, it's not just about getting the money, but it's also an element of deciding who should be responsible for maintenance. At least in the Australian context, there are 3 candidates. Because this infrastructure, like these water sensitive assets are like, well, are they planted garden beds? Are they stormwater drainage assets? Should it go to the stormwater drainage team? One option. Should it go to the parks team, because there's kind of plants in them and parks do plants? Or does it go to like a natural areas bushland management team? There's really 3 options. And it's really important to get that decision right, because I've observed that depending on who I've been out on site with and who I talk to about costs and difficulties of this, you get a very, very different answer. You go out with the stormwater drainage crews because what they're used to is machinery, cleaning physical infrastructure. The initial bias, at least, is, well, we want to dig this stuff out, we want to scrape surfaces. It's quite an expensive approach. My experience is that civil infrastructure teams are more likely to estimate the cost of maintenance being higher than if you go to parks or green infrastructure teams. Parks or natural areas teams, I should say. And so there's a really important decision. It's not to say that there aren't important elements of civil infrastructure skills to go into maintenance of this, but I've really noticed the difference between the councils that have given this to the civil teams versus natural areas teams and so on and so forth, about how they initially estimate maintenance costs. And eventually everyone kind of works back into the same space, just through experience, but that initial getting into it changes a little. The other thing that I've noticed here is, at least in a number of the councils that I've looked at, is that there was initially hesitance. Like, you go and try and have this discussion of, well, there's 3 candidates, who should be responsible for maintenance? And there's hesitance, there's kind of like, no, don't talk to me about that, I'm not interested, bit of like standoffishness. And at the background of this is really the situation where, I don't know what it's like in the New Zealand context, but in Australia, overall, we are not currently investing enough money in maintenance of our assets, full stop, whether that's roads or stormwater drainage or anything else. Do you imagine that you're the stormwater drainage person who already doesn't have enough money to look after their assets, and some long-haired freak who doesn't dress formally comes up and starts talking about, well, should you be responsible for maintaining these stormwater treatment systems? Well, suddenly that's like more burden, more assets. I already don't have enough money to look after its infrastructure. Often it's a stand up, look, please just don't talk to me about this because it's a threat. It's a threat to my already stretched budget. Where councils like Mackay did this really beautifully is that they created a space, got all three departments in a room, and essentially up front made a promise of, look, we need to talk about who should be responsible, but let's make a commitment up front here that regardless of who we decide is the most sensible department to do this maintenance, we're not suddenly all going to turn around and stick the hatchet in their back and be like, your problem, see ya. We're actually going to support you in the further steps to build a business case and get the budget. So it created a safe spot for these three departments to talk together and be like, okay, logically we need to do these activities, who has the skill set, who is most responsible. So you can get to a point where the departments go, okay, sweet, that's the right setup for us. Once that's decided, it's then building a business case. Just the beauty of this green infrastructure anyway is that we have a really logical business case to build. It's way cheaper to maintain this stuff in good condition than it is to fix it up. Like a bioretention system in a park, like that sort of system. In southeast Queensland, weeds grow pretty quickly, weeds get established really quickly. If you have a pretty good condition system and keep it in pretty good condition, you might expect it to cost like $5 per square metre a year for a bioretention system in a park like that. You let that system degrade for 12 to 18 months and the weeds get established, like those creeping weeds start to run through the system, as happened 6 months later in this system. You let those creeping weeds get established, they take over, they smother out the desirable plants, and suddenly you could be looking at $50 a square metre or more to fix up and replant that system. It is literally, for a system like that, 10 times more expensive to fix it up if you've done nothing for like 18 months than it is to keep it good in the first case. So immediately, there's a really simple business case here. It's a business case about, let's save some money, let's get onto this now. The sooner we get onto this, the cheaper it's going to be, and we keep it good. It's pretty simple to build a business case. In the case of many councils, it's the last two steps there when upper management got involved in a major way. Don't get me wrong, the department managers knew these conversations were going on. But then a coordinated briefing up. So all three of those departments we talked about, in the best example that I've seen of this, all three departments went, okay, we've decided that it's natural areas who are most in their situation. I'm not saying it has to be natural areas. We've decided it's the natural areas team who is most suited to doing this. We've decided that this is the business case. It's cheaper to maintain stuff proactively than reactively. All three departments went to their managers and then up to their deputy CEO simultaneously with that exact same message and said, it's this, and by the way, the other two departments are briefing up exactly the same right now. Do you mind just talking at the managerial level? And that was enough to create a sensible case that then informed a budget bid down the track. And this is a pattern that I've seen play out in quite a number of councils in Australia. So I wanted to share that with you as a potential model for, maybe this isn't the case. I know I listened to your presentation yesterday, Frank. I know that Auckland is already doing maintenance on some of your assets, but maybe for some of the other councils around the space, maybe that's not as up and running, or maybe there's already maintenance happening, but it's coming out of the parks budget and it's not dedicated. So maybe there's a formula that we can use there. So that's story number one. Story number two is about cognitive biases in WSUD. So this is a bit of a change of direction here. Still very much about assets on the ground though. So a cognitive bias is essentially a mistake you make up here when processing or remembering or evaluating information. So it's not just a one-off mistake though. It's not like, if Stu told me that I needed to get up at 6 a.m. to make a flight on Tuesday morning and I thought he said 6:30. It's not a one-off mistake like that. It's a systematic mistake. I got up early enough for the flight, that's why I'm here. But it's a systematic mistake. So it's a pattern of mistakes. It's like make the same type of mistake once and make the same type of mistake again and again and again. To try and demonstrate this, and I haven't tried to demonstrate this before, so we'll see how this goes, it may flop dramatically. I'm about to show you 6 photographs, one of each of 6 different stormwater treatment systems. I'm going to show them to you. I'm going to give a really brief commentary, but it's going to be pretty quick and flick on to the next one. At the end, I'm going to ask you a question. I want to see whether, I'm curious to see what your answer is. So, 6 sites, brief commentary, I'm going to keep flipping on. You ready? Sweet. Site number 1, little bar retention system, established really nicely in the first instance. The parks contractor sprayed out all the weeds. Number 2, did not establish well at all, but through a weird circumstance, I got hold of this while I was at Logan City Council. We replanted it briefly, but I didn't establish a maintenance program in the long term, and it is now screwed. Site number 3 is a very high profile wetland that initially had some plants in it, but they all died, and now it's a smelly pond. Site number 3, constructed in 2001 and never maintained. Site number, whatever number we're up to now, it's probably 5. High-profile streetscape bioretention system that Brisbane City Council constructed was monitored by Monash University. All the plants are dead. And what the heck is that hole in the ground anyway? The question, which one's the odd one out? No, seriously, which one's the odd one out? That was a serious mistake. It is the odd one out for that reason, but it's not the reason I wanted. Why did I put that in, not all the bioretention? Does anyone want to try? Okay, the pond is not it. Does anyone want to try another one?
Streetscape.
No, okay, let's have a talk about this. Only 5 of those are bad systems. That system's actually in pretty reasonable shape. It's the 2nd oldest bioretention system in Australia. It's the Hoyland Street bioretention system. It was constructed in 2001 by Brisbane City Council. They established it pretty well over the first 4 years. So there's a record of it being maintained for the first 4 years through to 2005. And then I know the person who's been responsible for its maintenance over the past 12 years. It has not been maintained. Apart from mowing around the edge and occasionally picking litter up in it, that system has not been maintained for 12 years. Now I'm not showing you this to say you don't need to maintain bioretention systems. But the point that I'm trying to make is that, well, let's give an example of this. Have you ever heard, sorry, go skip forward, this saying, if it bleeds, it leads. So this is from like publishing, this is from like newspapers. Ever wondered why newspapers put like the worst, most sensationalist story on the front page? It's this saying, if it bleeds, it leads. And essentially what it's saying is if it is graphic, distressing, terrible, nasty, it gets our attention and it sticks there, whereas if you put up a nice, fluffy story, it's far less likely to get our attention. In the newspaper world, that means, attention means selling the paper. I think there's something along these lines happening in our perceptions of WSUD in Australia. I cannot prove this, but it's what I think. So from a neurological point of view, the reason that we're so much more attracted, or from an evolutionary point of view, the reason we're so much more attracted and pay more attention to these threats and these negative stuff is that we evolved in a time when it was actually viable that you might get eaten by a tiger, trampled by a baboon, you know, gouged by an elephant or otherwise picked up in its trunk, as if that ever happened. But there are actually viable threats that we needed to avoid if we were going to survive. So the body evolved, the amygdala, it's part of the brain that's really good at sensing danger. And when it senses danger, it lights up and essentially blocks out everything else in your mind. That's sweet if you're being chased by a tiger, not so good in modern life, where the threats are less. Not non-existent, there are definitely threats in modern life, but what it means is we can often get sidetracked. We are more prone to noticing the negative stuff and overlooking the moderate or the okay stuff. And so I've noticed this situation where I think that we are far more likely. It's really easy to talk about all the failures. There are plenty of assets that have failed. There are also plenty of assets that have not. Combine this with a little bit of problem-solving mode that we as all engineers and scientists and technical professions end up in, and it's really easy just to end up talking about only the bad stuff all the time. And I think we need to catch ourselves about this. I'm not saying talk about only the good, but I think it's a lesson that I've learned, is we just need to make sure we're actually talking about this in a balanced way and not talking about this cognitive bias where it's so easy to notice the ugly stuff and overlook the stuff that, you know what, it's actually not that bad. I deliberately picked a moderate photo that was hard to tell. And to give one more example of this, so trying to balance this not so nice stuff with this stuff that's pretty nice. Did anyone see what I did there? What did you see?
You changed the angle you took the shot from.
Oh, nicely done. It's the same system. They are exactly the same system. The first shot, so that tree in the top right corner is that tree in the top right corner from different sides of the system. It's all perspective.